Well, greetings to everyone. Traditions. It seems that all of us have traditions that we keep. Different cultures often have different traditions and different beliefs as well. Some of our traditions might honor the true God. Keeping God's holy days would be an example, of course. Other traditions might actually give honor to a false god. And still others might not have anything to do with worship at all. Of course, many today blindly follow the traditions that were handed down to them. They never stop to consider why they observe these traditions. For example, most people cannot tell us why they always have a cake with lit candles for someone on their birthday, or why it's so important to blow out all the candles on that cake. Does this tradition honor our true God? May it perhaps honor a false god? Or is it simply a harmless tradition? Well, some may say if my friends and my pastor, even my parents, observe a particular tradition, then it must be okay, right? But of course, the prophet Jeremiah tells us in Jeremiah 16, verse 19, he says, "Surely our fathers have inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein there is no profit." Of course, it turns out Jeremiah was right. We see this happening today. Many traditions have been handed down throughout the generations that really have no value. Many of them are not based in truth. I'd like to tell you a true story about something I witnessed many years ago. At the time, I was living on campus at the University of Louisville. Now, there I met a young man and his wife from Thailand who were living practically across the hall from me. We quickly became good friends. Now, his English was not great, but it was certainly good enough for us to communicate. Well, let's say most of the time anyway. I suppose my Central Kentucky accent may not have always been easy for him to understand either. Anyway, one evening I was studying for an exam the following day. It was a very peaceful evening. I was all by myself. As I focused on my studies, I was practically oblivious to what was going on around me. All was very peaceful and quiet, at least for a while anyway. Suddenly, I heard a loud pounding on my door. It was so loud I wondered if the door might just break open at any moment. I was a bit scared at this point, to say the least. So I cautiously approached the door and was able to make out the voice of my good friend from Thailand. He was shouting, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. Well, I suspected he needed help. Perhaps there may have been a medical emergency or something, so I opened the door. My friend was alone, and he seemed to be shaking. He seemed to be okay otherwise, so I suspected that maybe something had happened to his wife. Now, he began speaking a mile a minute, as you might say, in a combination of his native language with just a few English words mixed in now and then. So I tried to get him to calm down and speak clearly so I could understand him. That didn't work. He was just too agitated, too upset to calm down. So I asked if his wife was okay. He nodded yes that she was. I was able to catch two words from time to time he kept repeating. I kept hearing the words, "out there, out there." So, of course, I wondered if there might be some disturbance outside our building. But it was a beautiful fall evening. Looked out our picture window there where I could see very well, and I saw nothing out of place. Didn't see any police cars or fire equipment or anything that would be a problem. Everything seemed perfectly peaceful. So why was this man from Thailand so terrified? He was practically hysterical. Well, not knowing what to do, I brought my friend over to my large picture window, pointed out the window, and asked if there was something going on out there that maybe I hadn't noticed. But now my friend's face turned to basically one of complete terror. At this point, I wasn't sure what to do. I actually began to think that my friend was having hallucinations or some mental issue. And I was contemplating calling 911 since I didn't see any way I could help this poor man. Then I heard him say in English with a voice of desperation, "Can't you see them?" "See what?" I asked. "Out there," he said. So I said, "Okay, point. Point to what you're seeing," because I didn't see anything. So he did. So he pointed, and I looked down his arm to see exactly what he was pointing at. I said, well, those are just two children. They don't seem to be bothering anything. And there, he pointed again. Oh, those are just children and their families out trick-or-treating. Is that what you're talking about? Those children there dressed up as ghosts? His expression began to change from one of absolute terror to one really more of bewilderment as I explained that there was nothing wrong outside. It was just Halloween, and this happens every year. I explained to him that this was a custom that was practiced here in the United States every October 31st and had been for as long as I could remember. I told him this was something actually that I did when I was a child. I explained the various customs of Halloween and assured him that there was nothing to worry about. These trick-or-treaters would soon be off the streets. It would not return, not till next year. I told him to go back to his wife and explain it all to her. If he had any more questions or anything else came up, just come back and see me. I planned to be up that night late anyway, studying. So I suppose, somewhat relieved, he went back to his wife and I went back to my studies. About half an hour later, there came another knock at my door. But this time it was a normal, if not a fairly quiet knock. Well, it was my friend again. His face looked much different this time. He didn't exactly look terrified, but neither was his peaceful look on his face either. So he asked if he could come in to talk to me for a few minutes. I remember thinking, now what? I'm trying to study here. But I know I would have appreciated a friend to talk to if I was visiting a foreign country and was unfamiliar with their customs. Well, my friend had calmed down a bit after learning that the ghosts and goblins were not actually roaming the streets that night, but he still seemed to be quite agitated. So, what's on your mind? I asked. Oh, he explained that in his country, people believe that the spirits of the dead, when they die, stay around their homes for the next several days. Their families try to encourage them to continue their journey to the afterlife. And to him and others in his country, this was a very sacred thing. That's what they believed. So he felt that the children, particularly the ones dressed up as ghosts, were being very disrespectful to the dead. And now he was upset about that. So that really disturbed him, I could tell. Now, while most see Halloween as a cute custom of children running door to door asking for a treat, my friend was originally shocked and terrified when he witnessed people observing the night of Halloween. To one who sees Halloween with fresh eyes, that have never seen it before, being unfamiliar with it, well, it can be a terrifying experience. If we stop and think about it for a moment, Halloween does have some strange customs, particularly to the uninitiated, you might say. Now, earlier this week, I asked a man in his 80s if he observed Halloween when he was a child. Well, he said that he did. So I asked him what he did for Halloween as a child. He said, well, that he would be involved in mischief. He said he might block roads from traffic, or mess with somebody's car. But nothing really bad, he said. So I suppose I wonder what he might have thought of as being bad, I might say. So I asked him why he did these things. He said, well, it's just something to do. So I pressed him on why he did this. Why did you do this? He said it was tradition. He said it was handed down to him from generations past. So I asked him if he knew where this tradition actually came from. But he said he didn't know. It was just something that everyone did. It was a tradition. I had to ask him one more question. You know me. I asked him if he observed Christmas. He said that he did. I asked him if he knew why he observed Christmas, if he knew where Christmas came from, where it originated. His answer? I really never thought about it. I suspect it's the same with most people. Most never think about where most of their traditions come from. Most never consider if their traditions might honor Christ or if they might possibly be an abomination to him. The Apostle Paul warns us in Colossians 2, verse 8. He tells us, beware, lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the traditions of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. Now, at this time of the year, many, including most Christians, observe the tradition of Halloween. But where did Halloween get its start? Is Halloween something that honors God? Is Halloween an abomination to God? Or is Halloween a tradition that has really nothing to do with the worship of any God, true or false? So today, let's take a look at Halloween. We'll look at its origins and how it's observed today. Now, Halloween's origins date back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. Some may have heard of this as being called Samhain, but Samhain is closer to the original name. The ancient Celts celebrated a day that they considered to be holy to their gods. This was actually a day to celebrate the dead, and they observed this day on October 31st each year. Their new year began on November 1st. October 31st, the day before, was the last day of their year. Now, the Celts believed that on the last day of the year, the world of the living and the world of the dead would intersect. Spirits of the dead would return to the earth and roam the countryside, playing pranks and making mischief for the living. And most believed it was too risky to venture out on a night like this with all these spirits roaming around. So they would remain in their homes. They would set out things to eat to help the good dead along their way, and also to appease those evil spirits so they wouldn't cause trouble. Those that needed to leave their homes were very concerned about running into some of these evil spirits now roaming the earth on this day. So, to avoid detection by these evil spirits, those ancient Celts would dress up as ghosts and ghouls and goblins to move about in safety. They believed the dead that walked about that night, that roamed the earth, would not harm them or kidnap them if they appeared to also be one of the dead. Now, the Druids, that was their religious leaders in those days, they also had large sacred bonfires, or as they were originally called, bonfires. Long ago, the people would get together to burn animals as sacrifices to the Celtic gods. This, they hoped, might also bring them protection. I can understand why they called them bonfires. The bones of the animals were all that were left after being burned in those fires. And if we go back far enough in time, we see that they practiced human sacrifice, particularly children, in these bonfires. As we've discussed before, the false religions of the world were mostly based on false sun gods. And many, if not most, of those false sun gods, like Molech, required the sacrifice of young children by fire in these bonfires, as we said. But do the traditions of Halloween come from our true God? Or could the tradition of Halloween, or Samhain, as it was originally called, could it be satanic in origin? We certainly can find no commandment in our holy Bibles to observe Halloween. Nothing's there about that. But on the other hand, according to the Satanic Bible, Halloween, or Samhain, is one of the 3 most important holy days for Satanists. And when it comes to witchcraft, Samhain is number 1 on the list of Wiccan holy days. And Halloween actually has its origins with the sacrifice of animals and even children in those bonfires. Halloween is a very large part of witchcraft and of Satanist worship. Turn with me, if you would, to 2 Chronicles chapter 33. That's 2 Chronicles chapter 33. We'll begin in verse 1. 2 Chronicles chapter 33. But thinking back about the ancient Israelites that followed God, surely the Israelites never observed anything like this, right? They wouldn't do something like this. They always followed the true God, right? They would have never sacrificed children in bonfires or practiced any form of witchcraft, would they? Well, when Hezekiah, king of Israel, died, his son Manasseh became king. Let's see what Manasseh did as king, and if God was pleased by the actions he took. Again, 2 Chronicles chapter 33, beginning in verse 1. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 50 and 5 years in Jerusalem, but did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, like unto the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. Wow. So Manasseh did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did things just like the heathen that God had already cast out because of their abomination to him. So he was doing things actually even worse. But what was it exactly that Manasseh did that so displeased God? What did he do? Verse 3. Here's the answer. For he built again the high places which Hezekiah his father had broken down, and reared up altars for Baalim, and made groves, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, whereof the Lord had said, In Jerusalem shall my name be forever. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. Now, pay close attention to verse number 6. See if this sounds familiar as we're talking about the customs of Halloween today. Okay. Verse 6. And he caused his children to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. Bonfires. Also he observed times, and used enchantments, and used witchcraft, and dealt with a familiar spirit, and with wizards. He wrought much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. So Manasseh burned children in the fire sacrifices and the bonfires of that day, just as the heathen that sacrificed their children to Molech and to other false gods, depending on, of course, on the specific culture. Verse 7. And he set a carved image, the idol which he made in the house of God, of which God had said to David and to Solomon his son, In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen before all the tribes of Israel, will I put my name forever. Now Manasseh also carved out an image, an idol, and set it in the house of God. For Halloween today, does anyone carve out an idol and place it at their home? Let's skip down to verse 9. So Manasseh made Judah and the inhabitants of Israel to err, and to do worse than the heathen whom the Lord had destroyed before the children of Israel. Well, I think obviously God was not pleased with what Manasseh had done. Manasseh had his bonfires where he sacrificed innocent children and used or practiced witchcraft, as we just read in verse 6. And this, of course, provoked the Lord to anger. This is not something that pleased him. Well, today, for Halloween, many have their own bonfires. Of course, we call them bonfires today. And I don't think many of us are sacrificing our children as was done in the past. But does it please God? What about carving pumpkins and placing them on our porches? Are these carved pumpkins some kind of idol, maybe? Why do people carve scary faces into pumpkins and illuminate them from inside the pumpkin? Anyone know? Why do we do? I wondered this for years. Why do we do this? What's the point? Well, one bit of folklore that might explain this is the legend of Stingy Jack. Have you heard about the legend of Stingy Jack? Well, you can read this online. It's very easy to come across. It seems that this guy called Stingy Jack is said to have tricked the devil into buying him a drink. He talked the devil into turning himself into a coin he would use to buy the drink. But then Jack prevented the devil from returning back into himself. Not sure how he did that. But eventually he allowed the devil to become himself once again. But that wasn't the end of the trickery between Jack and the devil. Next, Jack tricked the devil into climbing a tree, and then he put a cross on the tree, preventing Satan from coming down out of the tree. At least that's what the legend says. You might want to look this up for yourselves to get a few more details. There's a lot more to the story. But the bottom line of all this trickery was that, well, after being tricked by Jack several times, the devil didn't want Jack in his hell. That hell of fire and brimstone, we don't believe. But anyway, Jack eventually died. And when he did, the legend says the devil denied him entrance into hell. He didn't want Jack there, didn't like Jack. Of course, then neither would God allow him into enter, excuse me, but then neither would God allow Jack to enter into heaven. Remember, this was a fable. It was a tradition. Well, we know that's obviously not true, but since this helps explain some of our inherited customs of Halloween, let's continue with it. So now Jack, now unable to enter either heaven or hell when he died, well, at that point he had no choice but just to roam the earth forever. The legend also says Jack had only a burning coal to light his way during the night. And he placed that piece of burning coal into a carved-out turnip. That's right, a carved-out turnip to carry it. Now, as this legend continued, people started referring to Jack as Jack of the Lantern. Jack of the Lantern. This was, of course, shortened to Jack-o'-lantern. Now, people who were afraid of Jack, as well as all the other evil spirits roaming the earth on October 31st, well, they began to carve scary faces into turnips and potatoes. Eventually, we know that pumpkins began to be used for this purpose. And today, we still carve scary faces into pumpkins to keep Jack and all those other evil spirits away during the night of Halloween. And as part of the celebration of Samhain or Halloween, many still make their own jack-o'-lanterns today. Of course, the legend of Jack of the Lantern is obviously not true, yet many follow the tradition of Jack even today, whether they realize it or not. Now, the ancient Celts also believed that this night was good for telling one's future. It kind of makes sense, I guess, if we think about it. The last day of the year, when the world of the dead was so close, what better time to consult with the dead and ask those spirits about our future? So this was another activity the Celts practiced on the 31st of October. Fortune tellers would tell the people of their future. Seances were a popular tradition of Samhain. Now, October 31st was certainly a time for the occult. But of course, there were many additional traditions observed during Halloween, or Samhain. Around 43 AD, the Romans had conquered most of the Celtic lands. The Romans themselves had a day that celebrated the dead. It was called Feralia. Of course, over time, the two celebrations emerged. But the Romans had brought their own traditions. Here's an example. The Romans worshiped the goddess Pomona, among many other false gods and goddesses, of course, but Pomona was the goddess of fruit and of trees. The symbol of Pomona is the apple, right? The symbol of Pomona is the apple. Of course, don't forget that all Roman goddesses were also fertility goddesses as well. Keep that in mind. But the Romans brought the tradition of bobbing for apples, or in some cases, the apples were suspended from trees. But the object was to be the first to actually bite into an apple. That person then would be the next to marry and have children, courtesy of the fertility goddess Pomona and their luck or whatever in getting that apple. Well, we don't see much or hear very much about apple bobbing today, at least I don't. But if we watch some older movies or maybe some TV shows, you'll eventually run into this. You'll see this. So this was something that was practiced actually when I was a child, but don't see it much anymore. But the Romans weren't the end of the outside influences, though. The Catholic celebration of All Martyrs' Day was established on May 13th, 609 AD. Now later, All Saints were added to All Martyrs' Day. The observance was then moved from May 13th to November 1st. Around the 9th century, Christianity had spread into all the Celtic lands. As I said, the two celebrations in late October, they eventually merged into one. Now, around 1000 AD, the church, the Catholic Church, declared November 1st to be All Souls' Day in honor of the dead. And guess what? It was celebrated with big bonfires. People dressed up as devils and angels. Is this starting to sound familiar? Well, All Saints' Day is also known as All Hallows' Day. The night before was known as All Hallows' Eve, and eventually, of course, as Halloween. Well, that's a very brief history of Samhain as it evolved into the Halloween we know today. But what about Halloween today? What about it? Well, according to Statista.com, in 2023, 70% of those in the United States plan to celebrate Halloween. And of course, trick-or-treating and pumpkin carving are listed as two of the more popular Halloween activities. Of course, dressing up in costumes is a big part of Halloween. Recall that originally, dressing up in a costume was to avoid being detected by the evil spirits roaming the earth during Samhain. I saw television's website the other day, and it provided the following information about Halloween this year in 2023. This website was located at localnews8.com, 8 being the number 8, not spelled out, localnews8.com. And they say, well, according to them, the top children's costumes this year are, in order, number 1, Spider-Man. Number 2, a princess. Number 3, Ghost is still in there. Number 3 is a ghost. Number 4 is superhero. And number 5 is a witch. So we have a ghost and a witch in here. Now, the top adult costumes, according to the website, are as follows. These are adult costumes projected for this year. Number 1 is witch. Number 2 is a vampire. Number 3, I'm not sure about this, but number 3 is Barbie. Barbie, I guess from the movie maybe? Barbie, okay. Number 4 is Batman. Number 5 is a cat. I don't keep up with this, obviously. But even our pets observe Halloween, it seems. The top 5 pet costumes last year in 2022, according to the same website, were 1, pumpkin. 2, hot dog. I get that. That's especially for the dachshunds, I guess. Number 3 was a bat. Number 4, a bumblebee. I don't know. Number 5 was a spider. Whatever. I don't get out much, apparently. Okay, especially not on Halloween. So let me ask you this. How much money is expected to be spent on observing Halloween this year? How much money is being spent in the United States? Any idea? How many million, you think? Well, according again, this is from Statistica.com, quote, in 2023, consumers in the United States are expected to spend an all-time high of $12.2 billion. That's billion, not million. $12.2 billion US dollars for the Halloween season. Compared to 2021, this is an increase of about $2 billion US dollars, end quote. Wow. People seem to really be celebrating Halloween these days. But let's look at some of these customs of Halloween we celebrate today. Customs such as the jack-o'-lanterns, seances, fortune-telling, trick-or-treating, and general mischievous behavior. Let's start with jack-o'-lanterns. As we saw earlier, Jack of the Lantern is a mythical character who roams the earth in a mischievous spirit at that. The jack-o'-lantern we see today was originally used in an attempt to scare Jack and the other evil spirits away. Today, do we really believe that Jack and the other evil spirits of the dead descend upon us every October 31st? Do we believe that? Do we need protection from these evil spirits? And will a scary carved pumpkin really protect us? Well, the first thing I might bring up is if we read our Bibles, we know that the dead are dead. The dead know not anything. In fact, they sleep, as Jesus describes it. They're not harassing people on October 31st or any other time of the year for that matter. They simply sleep, awaiting their resurrection. So we know that's not true, that they're roaming the earth anytime. And second, if we truly are expecting a carved pumpkin to protect us in some way, isn't that relying on an idol and not on our Heavenly Father, as the Bible instructs us to do? And are we teaching our children to practice idolatry when we carve out those scary faces on pumpkins and place them on our porches? 1 John 5 verse 21 tells us, little children, keep yourselves from idols. Amen. Well, people might say, well, this is silly. Carving a pumpkin for Halloween night doesn't make it an idol. Well, maybe not, but my question would be then to these people, then what exactly is the purpose of this carved pumpkin, and why do we illuminate it outside our homes? Why do we do this? That's a good question, a fair question. What about seances? What about seances on Halloween? Popular thing. Leviticus, if you would, turn to Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 31. We'll try to get some more scriptures in here. Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 31. So what about seances or communicating with the dead as part of the observance of Halloween? We might recall that Saul did this very thing in 1 Samuel chapter 28, around verse 7 through the end of the chapter. Of course, we also know that Saul had previously decreed that anyone involved in familiar spirits was to be put to death. Yet Saul disguised himself and asked the witch of Endor to call up the dead Samuel. That would be what we might call a seance today. How does our God feel about consulting the dead or having a seance? Again, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31. Regard not them that have familiar spirits. I'll get it out. Neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. The contemporary English version reads, don't make yourselves disgusting to me by going to people who claim they can talk to the dead. God tells us that we should never approach those who claim they can talk to the dead. Those that do are being disgusting to God. I don't believe any of us ever want to appear disgusting to the God we love. If you would turn over to Leviticus chapter 20, that's one chapter over. We'll go to verse 27. That's Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 27. No, we should never go to anyone who claims to be able to speak to the dead. But what about those who do claim to receive messages from the dead? How does God feel about them, the one that claim they get these messages? So let's see in Leviticus 20, verse 27. A man also, or a woman that is a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. Or again, the contemporary English version reads, if you claim to receive messages from the dead, you'll be put to death by stoning just as you deserve. So that's not something we want to do. But God clearly doesn't approve of us attempting to contact the dead. In fact, the Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 9, verse 5, the dead know not anything. So if one hears from the dead, it's not a human that has died. They sleep, just as Jesus says. Rather, it's most likely a demon, a demonic spirit they're actually hearing from, and that's what makes it dangerous. So it comes as no surprise that God would forbid this. Turn next to Deuteronomy chapter 18. You would, Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10. That's Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10. So what about fortune telling? Let's get back to that. What about fortune telling? Well, believe it or not, I once attended a Halloween event hosted by my local Protestant church when I was a teenager. And one of my relatives dressed up as a witch. Now, she had a little booth at this event where she used a crystal ball to tell people's future. Sponsored by the church. Was God pleased? Again, Deuteronomy 18, verse 10. There shall not be found among you anyone that makes his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch. Witch, strike number 1. Verse 11. Or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. Well, what's necromancy? I didn't know. Well, according to the Free Dictionary Online, it is the practice of supposedly, I like the word supposedly here, the practice of supposedly communicating with the spirits of the dead in order to predict the future. Verse 12. Deuteronomy 18:12. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God does drive them out from before you. You shall be perfect with the Lord your God. I'd like to reread that to you, at least verse 10, that is, in a contemporary English version. This is verse 10. It says, don't sacrifice your son or daughter, and don't try to use any kind of magic or witchcraft to tell fortunes, or to cast spells, or to talk with the spirits of the dead. Our Bibles clearly, our Bibles clearly tell us not to engage in fortune telling or to attempt to talk to the dead. But my relative was not really consulting with the dead. They were just acting. I don't think they believed this. It was all in fun. So what's really the problem? Well, don't forget, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 22 tells us to abstain from all appearance of evil. So even if nothing was going on here, it definitely gave the appearance of evil. So something we should not be involved in. What about trick-or-treating? What about parents telling their children to disguise themselves as ghosts or goblins or a cartoon character or maybe something else, and then proceed to a stranger's home and say, trick-or-treat, implying that if they aren't given a treat, perhaps that person might suffer a trick. In other words, some mischief might just befall them. Now, I'm not trying to say that the parents actually intend to trick the homeowner, or even that they put their children up to doing so. However, they do teach the children to utter those words, trick or treat. The meaning of those words is clear. Either you'll give me a treat or I will play a trick on you. This is, of course, basically extortion, right? And again, many of you are saying, well, hey, I don't teach my children to destroy property or threaten anyone. I don't do that. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 12, if you would. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 36. Matthew 12, verse 36. But then I ask the same question I asked earlier. Why do we teach our children to say trick or treat or maybe trunk or treat? If we don't mean what we say, then these are obviously just idle words, right? Idle words, if we don't mean them. Again, Matthew 12, verse 36. I'll remind you, these are the words of Jesus Christ. Here's what he says to us. But I say to you, that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give an account thereof in the day of judgment. For by your words you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be condemned. Now, whether we're serious or not, should we be teaching our children to say those words, trick or treat? And what if we teach our children to observe the other pagan or heathen traditions of Halloween? Is God pleased by this? We won't go there today. We've been there a lot. But in Jeremiah chapter 10, we know God tells us not to follow the practices of the heathens. Those practices are vain. They're empty. They're devoid of value. So, excuse me. Sorry about that. We're going to Matthew 18, verse 2. Yeah, I talked about this last week, but I didn't make my point very well, so I'd like to try it again. Again, Matthew 18, verse 2. Remember, we are told not to follow the customs of the heathen. But what if we actually teach our children to follow these heathen traditions we've been looking at today, ones that came basically from the belief of false gods and goddesses? Let's take a look in Matthew 18, verse 2. And Jesus called a little child to him and set him in the midst of them and said, Verily I say to you, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter in the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoso shall receive one of the, and whoso shall receive one such little child in my name, receives me. But again, look closely at verse 6. We'll look at this again this week. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he was drowned in the depth of the sea. So again, things will not go well for whoever offends a child. It would be better if he was drowned in the depths of the sea. So it's not that this person will be drowned in the depths of the sea. That would actually be better, a better fate than that of a person that actually offends a child. And that's pretty bad. So we see here that things will not go well for anyone that offends a child. But what does the word offend in verse 6 mean? It just mean offend them as in make them angry? Well, offend here in verse 6 is the Greek word 4625 in Strong's Dictionary. It's the Greek word scandalizo. The definition is to scandalize, to entrap, that is, trip up, or to entice to sin. To entice to sin. So, by teaching our children to follow the ways of the heathen instead of the ways of the true God, are we not enticing them to sin? And if so, God seems to have some very unpleasant punishment in store for those who entice, or we might say beguile, a little one to sin. That's what Satan did to Eve, if you recall, in the garden. We know his future is not a very good one. Let's turn next, if you would, to Deuteronomy chapter 12. That's Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse 29. Deuteronomy 12, verse 29. What else does God have to say regarding following the traditions of those who worship false gods, who worship the gods of the heathen? Again, Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse 29. When the Lord your God shall cut off the nations from before you, where you go to possess them, and you succeed them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you not be snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before you, and that you inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. Verse 31. You shall not do so unto the Lord your God. For every abomination to the Lord which he hates have they done to their gods. For even their sons and their daughters have they burnt in the fire to their gods. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. You shall not add thereto, nor diminish from it. Well, I think we can safely say that Halloween is certainly not commanded in our Bibles. It's something we have definitely added to. Turn to Proverbs 24, if you would. Proverbs chapter 24, and we'll start in verse 1. At the beginning, Proverbs verse 24. Halloween is also known as the night of mischief. Now, the man in his 80s I spoke of earlier, he admitted he participated in mischief on Halloween in his youth. And we see pranks on Halloween, often resulting in inconvenience or even property damage. Sometimes they need to clean up the mess that's left behind. Should we be a part of a night where mischief abounds? Should we even associate with people that create mischief? Let's see. Again, Proverbs chapter 24, verse 1. What does Paul say here? I'm sorry. Wrong book, right? Solomon. Okay, sorry. Too much Paul in my head here. Okay, Proverbs 24, verse 1. I get it right. Be not envious against evil men, neither desire to be with them. For their heart studies destruction, and their lips talk of mischief. Drop down to verse 8. Verse 8. He that devises to do evil shall be called a mischievous person. The thought of foolishness is sin, and the scorner is an abomination to men. Okay, so Solomon gives us some wise words here. Okay, so do we even want to be associated with those who cause mischief or trouble on this night? Think about that. Let's turn to 1 Thessalonians next. 1 Thessalonians 5:5. That's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 5. Throughout the Bible, we see Jesus tell his disciples many times that we, his disciples, are children of the light. We're not of darkness. And Paul mentions this here in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 5. Let's read that. This time, Paul is speaking. I'll get it right. You, and that's us, brethren, you are all the children of light and the children of the day, and we are not of the night nor of darkness. Again, we're told repeatedly in our Bibles that we're children of the light and not of darkness. But I can't think of a more dark, holy day, or I should say holiday, than Halloween. Are we the children of the light, observing God's declared holy days during the light time of the year? Or are we the children of darkness? Does our holy day season begin as the season of darkness begins? Starting with, of course, the darkest holiday of them all, in my opinion. But, when I grew up, I celebrated Halloween. That's right. I went trick-or-treating myself. I didn't know any better. To tell you the truth, most people don't. It's not their fault, really, if you think about it. They're not bad people. They're not bad people at all. They're just deceived people. When I asked that man in his 80s about why he'd observed the holidays that he did, he replied, I really never thought about it. But if he or we really thought about it, would Jesus Christ really go trick-or-treating? Would he participate in the mischief of Halloween night? Would Jesus block roads, potentially hindering someone with a medical emergency from getting to a hospital? Would Jesus mess with someone's automobile on Halloween? Would he carve evil, scary faces on pumpkins to make jack-o'-lanterns? Would Jesus Christ participate in any way, shape, or form in this satanic holiday? Well, absolutely not. And so should we, his disciples. Should we participate in the satanic holiday in any form? Well, no, certainly not if we are truly walking in the light of Jesus Christ. So I'd like to end today with 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, we'll be reading verses 20 and 21. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 20 and 21. When it comes to celebrating Halloween at the beginning of the dark season, do we honor devils in the traditions of men? Or do we stand steadfast for the Lord? Again, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 20. Here's some more good advice from the Apostle Paul. Got it right this time. Here's what Paul says. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and the table of devils. So, brethren, we, as true followers of Jesus Christ, simply cannot ever compromise with darkness. We cannot drink from the cup of devils and at the same time drink from the cup of the Lord. So let's always stand fast for truth. Let's always drink of the Lord's cup. Let's no longer walk in darkness. Let us reject what is not true and what comes from the satanically inspired traditions of men. Rather, let's all walk in the light of our great Savior, Jesus Christ.